A huge thank you to patron Poulos for suggesting today's video topic. If you want to suggest a topic for next Wednesday's Name Explain video, all you have to do is support Name Explain on Patreon for $1 a month. Find out more by visiting patreon.com/Name Explain, which will be linked down below. Anyway, international waters are called that for a good reason, because they do not belong to one singular nation and are instead managed to varying degrees on an international scale. What this means is that one single country can't dictate the entire rules of many kinds of international waters like a sea, gulf, or ocean. This includes their names. The names we use for bodies of water are odd things. In many cases, these names have been around for ages or are fairly self-explanatory. Take the names of our oceans. The Atlantic's name comes from a titan of Greek mythology, and the Pacific got its name due to how peaceful the waters were there compared to others. The other oceans, the Indian, Southern, and Arctic, are all just named after their locations. While these oceans have these names, there's not really anyone around to actually enforce them. As already mentioned, international waters do not belong to a single nation, nor do they have governments of their own to form things like rules and laws. This means that when it comes to their names, it's up to us to just agree on them. And on the whole, this works out, albeit names get translated into different languages. For example, the Atlantic Ocean is its English name, but in Italian it's called the Atlantico. These are just different translations of the same name, however. As I said, these names are agreed upon on the whole, but on the whole doesn't mean unanimous. There are various bodies of water out there that have heavily disputed names. The disputes are normally between the countries that surround them. Different countries want these waters to have different names and actually go as far as changing the names of these huge tracts of water that they actually have no control or authority over. Take the Persian Gulf, which many countries in Arabia have decided to dub the Arabian coast, or the Sea of Japan, which China instead calls the East Sea. The Baltic Sea, which in German is known as Usti, meaning the East Sea, and of course we have the Gulf of Mexico, which the USA has very recently decided to rename the Gulf of America. This is going to be the main body of water I'm using as an example throughout this video, as it's a recent change and people are interested in it, but by the time you're watching I might not even have this name anymore. The joy of making topical content. But anyway, are these countries just allowed to do this? Are they allowed to just change the name of a body of water that has had a more or less universally agreed upon name for centuries? Well, technically, yes. The question of who gets to name water kind of has all different kinds of answers. There's technically one group of people who have the ultimate authority over the names of water, that being the International Hydrographic Organization, or the IHO for short. This is an intergovernmental organization who works in conjunction with the UN. Their main aim is charting the world's waters and setting international standards for our waters. This includes the names we use for them. The IHO has given specific names to every major body of water on our planet and labeled them as standard names, as well as their translations of course. It's these names that are used when these waters are discussed on a global stage. For example, Wikipedia. This website uses the IHO name for their articles of water. Like their article for the Gulf of Mexico is still called the Gulf of Mexico because that's the name the IHO uses. Of course they do mention its other names too. But here's the thing, while the IHO are out there doing their thing and the names they lay out get used for international reasons, individual countries don't have to abide by them. Countries, to varying degrees, are in control of the languages and names used in their land and can decide what names are used for what things. This is what's happened with all these previous examples. The USA has decided to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. The thing is, however, these countries only have control over what happens in their own borders. While the USA can make the Gulf of America the Gulf's new name, that name change only applies in the USA. Of course, other countries could also choose to rename it the Gulf of America too, or they could enforce the IHO name of the Gulf of Mexico, or they could rename it something else entirely. What matters to us is that these names only apply to countries that have changed them. To the rest of the world, this Gulf is seemingly still called the Gulf of Mexico. It's not like Kenya have decided to rename it too. What all this means is that countries are allowed to name bodies of water anything they want, but those names only apply to their countries. These disputed names, if you couldn't guess, can create huge tensions between the countries that are arguing over them. In some cases, people have to tread very lightly when it comes to conversations about these waters and what names they should use. Yet perhaps the people who these disputed names prove most troubling to are none other than map makers. When it comes to these disputed names, map makers have to be very careful what they do and what labels they apply to these locations. This is a more recent issue, however. I can't imagine there was much debate around these things in the past. Like a 13th century German cartographer labeling the Baltic as the East Sea probably wouldn't have stirred all that much of an uproar uproar. This is because the world was nowhere near as connected as it is today, and the only people really using this map would have been other German speakers who used this as their go-to name. Most might not even have known the wider world called the Sea the Baltic, and vice versa I suppose. This however is not the world we live in today. Things are far more connected in our modern day and age, and on the whole, people are far more aware of how others operate in the wider world. People today don't use paper maps all that often either. Most use digital maps connected to the internet on something like a smartphone or computer. These maps are way more sophisticated than any from the past, and the most used map today is most likely Google Maps. These digital maps like Google's are used and seen all across the globe. When it comes to these disputed names, Google and other map makers have to figure out what to do to appease their global users. Often the way they do this is by changing what their map looks like in different parts of the world. This can affect borders, additional information, and of course, names. Names of different parts of the world can appear different on international versions of Google Maps. This is seen most clearly in the names of water. Upon opening Google Maps in the USA, the Gulf of Mexico is now labeled as the Gulf of America. Yet in the Mexican version of Google Maps, it is still called the Gulf of Mexico. Yet in other countries like here in the UK, both versions of this name are seen. On my version of Google Maps, it currently says Gulf of Mexico, with Gulf of America in brackets below. The Gulf of Mexico name has much more prominence because that's the standard name given to it by the aforementioned IHO. Google have blog posts not only about how they pick names to their maps, but also about this recent Gulf of America update too. What these blog posts boil down to is that their decision is to use names which are official in the land their map is being used in. What's interesting is that this is completely their own choice. They have no legal reason to display these geographic specific names. They're just choosing to appease those countries. We know this because other American companies, like Wikipedia, are still using the IHO standard name of Gulf of Mexico. Of course, if the IHO also chose to change its name to the Gulf of America, then that would be a completely different situation entirely. But for now, seemingly the only ones insisting it's called the Gulf of America is America itself. But even then, it's not like everyone in the USA is calling this Gulf the Gulf of America. Names are entirely conceptual things. As I've already mentioned, there is not an actual nation in the Gulf of Mexico, with their own government who can speak on behalf of these waters and make the final call. This leaves us landlubbers to deal with the governing of waters, and unsurprisingly, it's pretty hard to govern something as uncontrollable as a huge body of water. What this means is that even if a country changes what they're going to call some water, people could very well ignore it. And I'm more than sure that this is the case in the USA. I imagine many Americans still call this Gulf the Gulf of Mexico, despite the fact this is not its official name in their country. Likewise, people in other countries like Sweden or Cambodia might now be calling it the Gulf of America, even if that's not the official name in their country. You know what? I could just declare it the Gulf of Gangagoo and no one could really stop me. You might not agree with me, but that's its name to me now. Honestly, the names we use for bodies of water are just a great reminder of just how conceptual names really are. Names are entirely human-made constructs. Nothing naturally has a name, and we are the ones who decide what things have names and how enforced they really are. And because of this, names only really work if we all agree on them, especially names for things that don't have voices of their own, like large bodies of international water. Certain groups of people can claim that a certain body of water now has a new name, but if we all choose to not use that name, then it means jack squat, regardless of how official it is. Also, these kinds of tactics are in many cases just surface level nonsense to divide people and focus the conversation away from more heinous things those in power are doing. But we don't need to delve too deeply into those waters, do we now? But as for the question in the title of this video, the best answer I can give as to who gets the name water is honestly everyone and no one. Name Explained depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explained videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.